Good evening and welcome to Ikemba, a youth program on reparations. I'm Shaquille Williams, your host. 400 years ago, African people were thought of as less than human. African people were thought of as property. They were treated as property. Now, Africans in the Caribbean and farther afield are calling for reparations. They're calling for an international relations discussion, bringing Britain and other countries that perpetuated one of the most inhumane acts in human history to the table to have a discussion on how best the damages done by slavery can be repaired. In 2015, the United Nations proclaimed the Decade for People of African Descent. That decade is to run from 2015 to 2024. It is international recognition that something different happened to people of African descent. It is international recognition that something must be done for what happened to people of African descent. This evening, we're going to talk about CARICOM's involvement in reparations. We're going to talk about youth involvement in reparations. And we're going to talk about the African identity. But before we do so, what really is reparations? And what really is the Caribbean's claim? Let's take a look.
So what exactly are reparations? Well, reparations were originally intended to pay for injuries and damages sustained during a war paid by the losing side to the victor. However, in modern times, reparations are paid to victims of human rights violations, usually by offending countries. While the United Nations establishes the rights of reparations seekers, it is usually up to individuals to go through local or international courts to seek payment. Alternately, offending countries sometimes agree to reparations as a response to cultural and social demands. For instance, after World War II, West Germany agreed to pay more than 3 billion Deutschmarks to Israel in reparation for the Holocaust. This money was used to compensate survivors, recover property, and invest in Israel's economy. Reparations can take many forms. According to the UN, they fall into 5 categories: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. Restitution seeks to restore property, employment, citizenship, or any specific loss by the victims. Compensation entails paying for financially accessible damages. Rehabilitation is assistance with any psychological, physical, or legal barriers. Satisfaction includes things like acknowledgments of atrocities or public apologies by the offending party. And guarantees of non-repetition are usually legal or cultural changes to the status quo to prevent the situation from reoccurring. So who receives reparations? Well, usually recipients are the original victims or their families.
In the 18th century, British merchants shipped around 3 million people from West Africa across the Atlantic to the Americas and sold them into slavery. They made £4 trillion from the unpaid labour alone. Portugal and Holland pioneered this slave route. Britain made a national fortune from it. Much of the Britain we know today was built with slave money. Ports, cities and canals. Even the Church of England has admitted making money from the slave business. By the 19th century, a fifth of the British elite had made their fortunes from slavery, among them David Cameron's distant cousin, General Sir James Duff. The Liverpool merchants who founded what's now Barclays Bank were slave traders. In 1833, when slavery was abolished, slave owners were paid £20 million in compensation for their loss of property. That's £2 billion today. More than 10 million people died as a direct result of the Atlantic slave trade, but the survivors got nothing. West Africa, nothing. Now, 15 Caribbean states, including Jamaica, have launched the first united campaign for reparations from Britain, France and Holland. They have suggested compensation equal to the sum offered to slave owners in the 1830s, £2 billion. They also want an apology,
Don't blush.
recognition of the historic atrocity.
They hid in caves. My great-grandmother was born in a cave to make sure that she was not born as a slave. And that is what Britain perpetuated.
But the British government has refused to give either. David Cameron's first official visit to Jamaica has amplified calls on Britain to agree to reparations. Some argue that if Britain did pay, it wouldn't be the elite footing the bill but the tax-paying working classes. Others have said this was 200 years ago, it's in the past, why should I pay now? In Jamaica, slavery was followed with a century of colonialism.
Most of the land is still in the hands of Europeans.
When the Brits left in 1962, 80% of the population were functionally illiterate. Male literacy remains 4 points below the global average. 19% of the country live in poverty. When historic crimes have generational victims, who should pay?
When historic crimes have generational victims, who should pay? A fitting question to take us into our discussion this evening. With us to talk about that and other things are some young people who have been involved in the reparations movement in Guyana, as well as a woman who has been fighting for reparations across the entire Caribbean. We have with us Ms. Adiola Walcott, who is the secretary of the Ikemba group, Mr. Kibwick Copeland, who is the president of the Ikemba group, Dr. Hilary Brown, who is the program manager for culture and community development at CARICOM, and Ms. Shantae Day, another member of the Ikemba group. Welcome to our first program of Ikemba Youth Discussion and Reparations, guys.
Thank you for
Thank you
having
for
us.
having us. Thank you.
All right. Let's start with the young people. Before you got involved in the discussion on reparations, what were your thoughts? And how did your involvement change or skew or any of those thoughts that you had before?
Well, fortunately for me, when I heard about reparation, I was being informed. So it was a process where I heard about it and I was informed at the same time. But after that, my main issue was what would the youth population say?
If I should pitch it, I was also fortunate when reparations was introduced to me. I was a bit briefed. I understood that it was about slavery. I understood it was about the persons who enslaved us to pay us, of course, and to also accept the crimes and injustice they drive towards us. And so, of course, it was some amount of payment, not only by lining us up and to, take payment by financial cash, etc., but to put into different areas like infrastructure, etc. But even though I was briefed about it at the initial stage, I was not so connected or compelled to the whole movement of reparations. It was good knowledge, but at that point in time, I wasn't knowledgeable or was not in the state of mind to feel compelled to it. But look at me today, being an advocate for it, understanding that reparations not only affected us within the 400-year period, but also affects us presently today. So now I'm much more compelled. So at first, even with briefing, it was not that astonishing,
Dr. Brown, I know CARICOM has been trying to get young people more involved in the discussion on reparations, more vocal in the discussion on reparations. How is that going?
Well, I think we're making good progress across the region. We have 9 active national reparations committees. Guyana has perhaps one of the most active committees
Excellent.
across the region. And what we have done over the last couple of years is to stage a series of youth rallies, runs for reparations. We have a reparations baton. So we have young people right across the region who have been involved in getting out in the street and really campaigning for reparations and raising knowledge and awareness. And I think out of those youth rallies and runs and relays, we have seen a number of people emerge, young people, who are really interested in being advocates and ambassadors for reparations.
And that same baton that you speak of was at the Harmony Day today on Main Street.
Oh,
Yes,
fantastic.
at the reparations booth.
Okay.
Guys, coming back to you, what has, I mean, you've touched on it a little bit, but what has your experience been like? You've met other young people who are advocates, built some sort of camaraderie. What has the experience been like from then to now?
Well, it has been amazing because when you're involved, you learn so much that you didn't know about slavery and about African history. And it gives you the ability to want to know more, the curiosity to, okay, we are more than just slaves. So you're just curious to know more and you're meeting people at the same time. So it was amazing.
Yeah, I've been in youth work, youth activist for some time. Like say a period over 9 years, and being active, meeting all kind of different young people from different walks of life. You get pulled into different activities, and Afrocentric activities is one that I fall into. And among the whole conversation of Afrocentric development, there's reparations, right? So I got into the whole conversation of reparations. I even did poetry for different events before. So I think it was very transformative, in the ideology, the way I looked at myself, not only at reparations, but as a people, as an Afro Guyanese, So I think it was very impactful in my life, We met a lot of young people, persons who were informed, persons who were not so informed but were interested. Then there were the other young persons who are disinterested and think that doesn't have nothing to do with them. So I think it was an eye-opener for me because, we live in Guyana and we're Guyanese, but yet still we have a culture that adds the whole Guyanese mix. So I think it was very much, powerful and bonding for me.
All right. I know Ms. Day is a bit more of a recent face, but what has it been like for you so far?
Well, understanding beyond slavery, I think a lot of times when we talk about Africans, we emphasize a lot on the slavery aspect of it. But being a part of the team and mixing with the young people and giving them the understanding of the different tribes and where we came from and reasons why we should fight for reparations. So it's good to have those discussions.
Right. I want to throw out another question, which is, how important do we see youth involvement in furthering the movement for reparations?
I think youth is our largest human resource, and for the governments, for Britain to see that we're serious about getting these reparations to develop our country, then the youths need to come out and say, well, we need this because we're lacking X, Y, Z. And without youths being African young people coming out to say we need to know about our culture, we need to know about our lands, we need to know how we can develop. And through that, whatever reparations, as Kibbe would have said, beyond money, infrastructure, anything to help us develop as young people.
Added to that same conversation, it's my belief that the young people in the whole should be a part of every discussion of importance. And reparations is a discussion of importance. You see, we are the majority, as Shana just said. We are the majority. And it is, let's say, the persons we want to pay, it is they promote lack of knowledge in this area of reparations and slavery. Because the less persons who are knowledgeable, or less persons who will be advocating, and less person advocating is the less of our chances of actually claiming reparations. So young people need to come into this conversation because I think the link or the block between the link is that persons think that reparations only has to do with slavery or what happened in 400 years period. But we have to understand how it affects us today, every day, right? And until young person understand the effects of it today and start to add it up to what actually happens and not having to understand exactly why is this so, linking it back to slavery. Like just for a quick example, why is it that Afro-Guyanese or African people are more at risk to hypertension, diabetes? not in the Caribbean, we're fed sugar and salt. It was generated, you know, into our genes. So there's a lot that person have to understand about the past that affects us today. I think young people have to play that part.
From Karakum's perspective.
Yes, well, certainly, I think historically we have seen that any mass movement that has been successful has had youth involvement. You can't have a successful movement without young people. And I think perhaps an example that many young persons know would be very familiar with would be, for example, the youth movement, the Parkland students in Florida, who are bringing about a real game changer in the United States in terms of gun control and gun regulations.
True.
But even within our region, our Rastafarian movement, anywhere that you have seen meaningful social change, young people have been involved. But in addition to that, I think young people are some of the main beneficiaries of reparations, and they have a vested interest, whether they know it or not, in pursuing this issue, because a lot of the underdevelopment, a lot of the disadvantages that they face now, just in advancing their education, in realizing their, their lifelong dreams, many of it, the discrimination and the barriers are very much rooted in the history of our region, of slavery and colonialism. So I think young people really are a critical partner in this, the main beneficiaries and the ones who can really bring about meaningful change.
Right, so young people are the ones who can really bring about meaningful change, and one of the main beneficiaries of reparations. And I know reparations as well, it has a lot to do with your identity. It has a lot to do with an identity of African people that they tried to steal, and that along the road, a lot of things have been lost. Let's go to a video on identity, and when we come back, we can have that discussion.
She had them raging hips, fire from her tongue. She equipped with a blazing glare. Let them boys in the smoke. The sun don't touch her. She too hot, scorching. Burnt from all ways, them devils told her how to cook her soul. Nowadays, they say she's pretty for a dark girl. Like it's a compliment. Smothered in Sarah Bartman's hips. Miley Cyrus call it a prop now. Black girl be too permeated. You see us everywhere, but our mouths ain't got no filter if you can't hold water. Black girl be in the itty bitty McKinney bikini showing out, they flinging us now. She got child support superpowers singing I wish you would hymns. One of these days, black girl be so powerful, her hair will stay pressed after being underwater. Can't put no seasoning on that. Her tongue too crispy, and she got flavor. Ain't that how them mulatto babies is made? Peach be so juicy, you gotta tell her hair ain't good. Condition them so their head ain't dry. Bleaching our skin so that we can be white enough. Photoshopping our bodies so that we can be photogenic enough. Post-traumatic syndrome got us forgetting about ourselves. We so potent, NAACP had to remind us, white girl wanna be black. Ask Rachel, black girl, free yourself. And when you fly, tell them, Fannie Lou Hamer sent you, tell them, you are your own queen, tell them, your brown sugar maple syrup can't be bought off shelves, tell them, dark don't mean dirty, nappy don't mean nasty, loud don't mean ratchet, bold don't mean problematic. They say the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice, but in these times, the blacker the baby, the longer the noose. Our sons don't need sunscreen, they run from protection, they get their vitamin D from laying 4 hours face down on the ground. They want to keep us uneducated, file us in Section 8. Then when we start to assimilate, we start talking like we got some sense, start walking like we learned we can run for president now, start protesting because we stand up for our rights. We have a purpose here. You can't take that away. You can't Emmett Till our sons no more. You can't 16th Street Baptist Church burn our bodies no more. You can't walk up in the church and shoot us in prayer no more. You can't kill us in the jail cell and call it suicide no more. This ain't open season. Black girl, you are brick, you are mortar, you are design, you are ceiling, more than just measurements. Raise your head. This black girl ain't got no blues tonight. You be you in your blue hue, beautiful as you want to be. Dark eyes, thick thighs. We don't need to apologize.
black don't mean dirty, nasty, or negative, or any other bad synonym that you can find. But be your black you. Uh, while so there was a baton that we were talking about earlier that was passed around the Caribbean, and now it has been passed into our studios at NCN. This baton is, I think, it's a replica, and there are three in Guyana, one for each county, I think. Yeah. So this is the Demerara replica for Guyana, and there are two others like this. What emotions did that poem evoke? Anybody?
I mean, as you said, dark is not dirty. So that was wow. It was like black is beautiful. It's not dirty. It's who you are. So you must embrace it.
Right. Have you ever had a bad experience or any experience where you were ashamed of your skin, your complexion?
No, I haven't, because as you can see, I'm light skinned, so we know that persons with dark skin, they are faced with the stigma that black is not beautiful. But for me, I'm brown skinned, so I didn't have to go through that process.
Let's go to Kimberly.
You know,
Dark brother like myself.
I had to jump. You know, she didn't have a problem because she light skin. It speaks for itself. Right?
Yeah.
I never really had the problem. I don't think I ever had the problem of being dark. But I could remember one time I was playing basketball, and there was this guy, different race, and we were playing basketball. And I think he maneuvered and he switched through a particular position, and we said, you know what, me head straight and my color is light skin, so I could do anything. And from that moment, you understand, he was even he was innocent in his remarks also, because of course this is something that has been generated into the minds of the light skin and the dark skin, right? I never really had a problem. I think I always was brought up with this kind of sense of confidence and so in my color and so forth. But for what Adiola just said, she didn't feel that she had a problem because she was light skinned. So that explains enough to know that person who are darker skin has a problem, they're stigmatized. And the skin alone, person stigmatized it as to be dirty, as to be once you're dark skin you can't really maneuver, or you're not you don't have the same rights or same advantages as somebody who's light skinned, and we see it across the world. Right, so I never really had a problem, but we understand from Adiola's statement alone the impact of being light skin and dark skin.
What are some of the things that we think characterize our identity as African people, besides the texture, the tone of our skin?
All right. Well, if I should jump in back again, if y'all don't mind, it's more than just our skin. It's more than just our hair or the image that you see. Of course, the African identity has a lot to do with our culture, our structure. Besides the skin and the color, our structure has to do with our culture. We are African people are nature people. We're nature driven. Music, the drumming, things that when we were in slavery we couldn't have done, because you'll either be sanctioned to death if you were caught drumming. We are rich. We have a rich culture, and I think that culture and that identity of being an African, or of course we're African Guyanese, but we all stemmed from Africa, the motherland. I think that has been washed away, even into our schools, into our school books. They put the parts that they want us to see, and when you look at what you've been taught and what you had to learn, it's completely different. So our identity has a lot to do more than just what you see with us. You see as a black person, you curly hair, that's Afro person. But it has more that. It goes back to culture. It goes back to our customs. It goes back to family. If you look at the village movements, things that we did after the rebellion, etc., the village movements, African people are community kind of based people, right? And those are certain things that identify us as African people. And what slave masters and in that time of slavery they worked to do was to separate the family. Send the father away, the mother away, the children away. They were not allowed to keep that family bond because of the strength of it. So, that's just my take. I don't want to go over.
What do you think, Ms. Day?
Well, Kevin had a discussion earlier, and we were talking about a lot of young people not truly knowing beyond the slavery, their culture. Because he said, we were accustomed separating and going our ways and not truly understanding why we love storytelling so much, and why we love the sound of drums, and why we instead of hopping or we dancing, we choose to gyrate our waist. You know, these are things that, if we look at history, would determine, you know, our patterning as an African woman or man.
Dr. Brown, I know CARICOM has an entire 10-point plan as it relates to reparations. I know one of the points has something to do with culture and identity and that sort of thing. I'm hoping that you can tell me a little bit about that plan.
Yes, I'm happy you've raised the 10-point action plan, because essentially that is a statement about the areas in which we feel we need to repair the damage. All of the areas listed in that 10-point plan, things like psychological rehabilitation, establishing more cultural institutions, having an indigenous peoples program, addressing technology development, all of these things, education, are all areas that we felt were retarded through the whole experience of slavery and colonialism. So certainly we know that when Africans were brought from the continent forcibly in that period, that one of the systematic forms of oppression that were meted out to the African people was to separate them from that history and culture. The first thing was to take away their name. So you had to adopt the name of the owner of your plantation, right? And you were branded so that they would know who owns you, and you could no longer use your African name. And similarly, our African spirituality. We look at so many things in African spirituality from that perspective of the outside, of the European, because we don't know enough about it. We don't know about Shango and Candomblé and voodoo. We think that these things are scary because those are things that were separated from us. So we were not allowed to maintain the essence of our culture, not only cultural manifestations in terms of, you know, the drama and the storytelling and the drumming and so on, but also the essence of family and and our peculiar values, our worldview. All of those things were under serious threat and oppression, because those were viewed really as our strength as a people. And in order to subjugate the population, you had to strip them of that language, culture, their name. And I think that's why the issue of naming is such a big thing in the African community now, and why so many people have gone back to adopting African names for their children.
Like Kibwe.
Like Kibwe.
And as Dr. Brown has rightly said, name and culture, they're part of our identity. Unfortunately for me, my name is of African descent. It's from Nigeria actually, and it means honor and crown. So when I learned about my name, I was amazed. I actually fell in love with my name. So our names practically identify us, and additionally who we characterize ourselves as, because we may be dark, we may have kinky hair, but then we're not comfortable with who we are. So we should be proud of that, and that's part of our identity.
Right. Coming back to Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown, as the program manager for culture, the big woman involved, what is the action plan for CARICOM in that area? What are we doing to get African people back their culture, to restore identity?
Well, I think the culture program of CARICOM is an inclusive one. So African culture is important, but also really it is about looking at the Caribbean and all of the various cultures that have come together to make us who we are. So it is an inclusive kind of approach, and certainly the culture program has responsibility for the reparations agenda, which came out of the heads of government meeting in 2013 in Trinidad and Tobago, when our heads of government took that historic decision to pursue Europe for reparations. So that certainly is part of the program that the culture program implements, and Certainly, I think most people would perhaps be aware of Carrie Festa as being one of our
Yes.
flagship programs, where really what we try to do there is to bring artists from all different walks of life, all different cultures, right across this hemisphere together to share. Because I think a big part of how we address the issue of race and so on is through understanding. We need to understand each other. We need to understand each other's history, where we're coming from, what our peculiar worldview and approaches and aspirations. Many of them are similar and some of them are different. And I think the more that we understand each other, that's the more that we're able to build a just and equitable society.
And I know beside an identity as a community, we also have an identity as an individual. There's a quote, and Kibe, I want to throw this to you. And the quote is by B.R. Ambedkar, and it says, "Unlike a drop of water, which loses its identity when it joins the ocean, man does not lose his being in the society in which he lives. Man's life is independent. He is born not for the development of society alone, but for the development of his self." I know you founded a youth group by the name of Clear Path. So I'm hoping that you can tell me, or what do you say to young people who are struggling to find their identity?
Well, I could jump into that right away, of course. Education is very important. You know, a quote by Marcus Garvey which states, and I quote, "A people without knowledge of their history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." And we go to the fruit tree analogy, whereby there are persons who actually believe that they are a mango tree, whereby they are a cherry tree. So they can't be fruitful. You know, I think even when it comes to the mix of Guyana, talk about social cohesion, which is something that we're trying to. The government is big on social cohesion. Unless a particular race or particular people can have that individual identity among themselves, they can't really add meaningfully towards a cohesive mix. It'll be just like a drop of water, drop in the ocean, just dilute. And when it comes to young people, you know, we have this tendency of just, we are alive, we follow society, we just go about living. You know, society set these 4 areas of who you should be and how you should think, and we just follow through. You know, we don't do that soul searching. We don't try to go in depth. Like, you know, I'm an African person. Even if I'm mixed with Amerindian and Indian, I have an African component, right? What about the African that will add to my mixture? You know, so it's all about being informed. Try to understand yourself. Basically, besides even trying to look at any textbook or any documentary or any research, just try to understand yourself. Ask yourself questions. Look at things that, you know, I think it was T.D. Jakes that said it well. They have so many persons that are so busy dating others that they never had a chance to actually date themselves. So, you know, they dating everybody else, but they never had a chance to actually sit down and say, "What? Let me date myself for a while." And I think it's a journey. Even though I might sound, I don't know exactly how I sound, I might say, you know, I'm speaking, you know, sound enough, I'm still searching to really find myself. Another journey that we'll continue to do until we are old, and, you know, in our 80s, we still going to find our older self, you know? So it's a continuous journey. But it starts with you asking yourself questions. It starts with researching, just asking, you know, what is more? What is there that I can actually expand and I could get in touch with?
All right. Ms. Day, I'm hoping you can jump in.
Well, yeah, doing psychology and, we teach coping skills to some young people at the Present Youth Award program. And we tell them, you know, you have to understand yourself. Ask yourself, who am I? Looking at your parents, looking at your past to understand your present to determine your future. If you can't see, you know, what you like or what you love doing, where do you intend to go, then how can you set, you know, a clear path? How can you move forward?
I know, that's one small point to add to that, right? I think I was doing a program with some young people, and I asked them a simple question. I asked them, "What is your favorite movie?" And this particular young lady gave me her favorite movie. I said, "Please explain that movie to me." And she explained who was the star of the movie, what the star had to do, and how it ended, right? And what was the process. So I said, "What is your movie?" And explain your movie. And explain how it goes. And she was like, "I never thought of it." You know, because we are so afraid with everything else.
that we hardly
depict
think of
exactly
ourselves.
this person's life. We know exactly what that film is all about. We know what that song is all about. But we never actually took the time to look at ourselves and actually make that part. Like actually get a pen and let's write down. This is what I want to do. This is going to be my journey. You know. And of course, from time to time you can edit that journey, but it's something that person don't really do.
That's true. As Kibwe and Miss Day rightly said, finding yourself, and Maya Angelou said that nothing can dim the light that shines from within you. So, love who you see when you look in the mirror, love the texture of your ear, the color of your skin. So, create this inner peace within yourself so you would look at the world differently. So, the world might say black is not beautiful or black is dirty, but once you have this inner peace, you would like what you see when you look at the mirror, and it will give you a different approach to life.
I'm happy we're talking about finding self. If we can't, and I want to throw this to Dr. Brown, if we can't identify ourselves, if we can't, like we said, find ourselves as an individual, if we can't identify as an individual, how do we identify with a collective? So if we haven't moved past that individual identification, how do we identify with a collective group? And then what are the challenges there in getting young people involved in the reparations movement?
Hmm. Yes, that's a fundamental question, really, because I think that the legacy of the experience of slavery is one that has left people of African descent with a lot of psychological damage. And I think that's why I really appreciate a lot of the more conscious artists that we have in our community, who are doing a lot to get the message out that black is beautiful, that you love yourself, that you need to understand your history, your culture, your roots. You need to Bob Marley and Chronics. And
Yeah.
yes, I know you're gonna go to
Chronics.
Chronics, right? So I think all of those things are important. I think so much needs to be done to really repair a lot of that damage. That psychological damage is there, and as you rightly say, if you don't have that wholesomeness of person, of personhood, of appreciation of self, then you not only can contribute to a group, you can contribute in any relationship, because you're always fighting those demons, you know, um, of that lack of self-respect and appreciation. So that's really fundamental.
Yeah. And one of the things about music is the subliminal messaging.
Mhm.
How do we frame messages specifically to attract young people? Whether it's, I mean, and you touch on it a bit, Dr. Brown, but whether it's music or the arts or anything else, how do we frame messages not only to attract young people, but to make them start thinking about self?
You know, you in some way you answer the question. You know, I'm just going to follow up because you have to first speak the youth language, and young people are more prone to the arts, whether it be music, whether it be drama, whether it be poetry, like we had the poetry clip that we showed, you know, whether it be through social engagement, etc. So in there's a traditional way, of course, how persons come over to bring forth information to young people or to people in general. You know, we sit down, we eat in the classroom, or either we try to, you know, give a lecture. But the young people of today, you have to study them. You know, it's not all, but it's a work in progress. You have to understand them. You have to meet them where they are. We understand that they listen to chronics, but then we have to communicate with chronics. Keep the consciousness going. Set the seeds. Because trust me, I know a lot of young people sing chronic song from the starting to the ending. And certain things they just can't comprehend that are even shorter than chronic's lyrics. So you have to look exactly where the interest lies. You know, we have the medias, within art, some persons like the poetry, some persons sit down and they're in tune to the poetry, some persons sit down and they're in tune to the drama, they like drama. So then we have to look at these different aspects where the interest is, and then we have to set the seeds. You know, you don't want to just rush things into young people. Young people are they're easy to rebel, you know, so you have to set the seeds. You know, keep them thinking, as time goes on, you know, you smooth it in, you know. So I think the arts is one of the main means of getting over to young people, send that message positively.
I know, and I know Ikemba, as a group, you've been planning something. I'm hoping that you can tell me about what you've been planning.
Extra.
Yes, so we have been planning an outreach because we're youths. We're trying to get the message of reparation and not just
You think the culture extravaganza?
yes, the cultural
Yeah.
extravagance, and not just about reparations. Because before we get to the process of reparations, we need to understand and recognize the importance of our history. So the cultural extravaganza is focused on educating students in school about the importance of the culture and accomplishment of the African people. And then, as Kibe rightly said, meeting youths halfway. When we speak to youth, they don't want to hear about slavery. We don't want to hear about slavery because we attach slavery as something stigma. Oh, this is what we went through and all of that. But we are more than just slavery. We are African people have accomplished a lot. So when we're meeting them halfway, we not just highlight the history, we highlight the accomplishment and where we want to go in the future as African people.
All right. I'm really happy that we had this discussion. I think some really interesting points came out. I'm sorry that it needs to be cut short now, but I'll ask for quick closing remarks. 5 seconds. Starting from.
Well, as I said before, nothing can dim the light that shines within us, as Maya Angelou rightly said. So I'll leave it at that.
Slavery was injustice done to mankind, not half man, half beast, but to mankind, and predominantly the African race. So it's something that we young people should try to, add our voices to and advocate for reparations.
Dr. Brown.
Well, I want to encourage all young people to, starting with this program, get out there and start to gather information about your history, your culture, your race. We are now observing the International Decade for People of African Descent from 2015 to 2024. And it's an important decade where we need to get out there and say, and address the issues that have affected African descended populations. So that's my encouragement to young people.
Ms. Day?
Well, to African youths, understand yourself, learn your history, and let's work together for the movement of the reparations.
Understand yourself, learn your history, dig deeper. You're watching Ikemba, a youth program on reparations. Let's go into our Did You Know segment.
Scholars and scientists now concede that Africa is the birthplace of mankind. Africans were the first builders of civilization. They discovered mathematics, invented writing, developed sciences, engineering, medicine, religion, fine arts, and built the Great Pyramids, an architectural achievement which still baffles modern science.
The 225th Emperor, direct descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. He is the King of Kings, the Lion of Judah. The name Haile Selassie means power of the Trinity.
Educate yourselves of Africa, to liberate yourself, Africa. Keep your heads up high, no more will we cry. Yeah. Our history that they stole, Africa, is written in our souls, Africa. Oldest nation on this earth, know just what you're worth. Well, ships that sail to distant places robbed us of our rights and words. History says that you've betrayed us, talking of the gods you serve. Hear the rumbling in the sky, tears that our forefathers cry. And today we're still in chains, take the shackle from our minds. You're the cornerstone, the king upon the throne. How beautiful art thou, Africa.
you very much. I'm very pleased to have been invited to speak for the proposition on this debate. Before I go into my speech, I would just like to say something in relation to the two speeches we have heard before. It is very funny that the two speakers spoke nothing about the countries where slavery existed because of the British colonialization. And I am going to speak about slavery. I want to also say that we've heard about the aid that Britain is given to former colonies or countries who are in need of assistance. But many countries that never experienced colonialization and slavery in the way that it was perpetuated by Britain are also giving aid to countries that need it. And we heard about what about the schools and the buildings and the roads. Well, those were put there for the English in order to allow them to rid our countries. In places like Jamaica, where we had the British living in England and sending out their minions to run the plantations, those roads and those services were only put in the places where, would you allow me to finish this? They were only put in the places where the plantations were and where they needed to get the material to the ports. For the rest of Jamaica, there was no infrastructure. When slavery was abolished, the slaves moved as far from the plantations as possible. If you see the hills and valleys and mountains that they had to climb to get away, you would say to yourself, as I have often said, slavery must have been terrible. Well, let me tell you how slavery was. Imagine you're being grabbed from your country. You're being put upon a ship and put across what is called the Middle Passage. And you get to Jamaica, and you are stripped. And you stand in a square, and people walk around and look at you. They feel you and determine whether they are going to buy you. And when you are bought, you are put on the plantation. There was no family life. It was not encouraged. If slaves developed relationships, they would take the children away. They would move or sell one of those partners to another plantation. And so what do we get today? We have countries where family life that our people knew in the places where they came from does not exist. Fathers were never encouraged to look after their children. When can you imagine when the slaves heard that there was going to be an end to slavery and there were children to be born? They hid in caves. My great-grandmother was born in a cave to make sure that she was not born as a slave. And that is what Britain perpetuated. Yes, I'll take it.
I agree that slavery is terrible, but I think that it has been an institution of humanity for thousands of years.
It does not make it right. Thank you. Thank you. It does not make it right. Right now, laws are being made or changed or repealed to remove what was something that was correct at one point and is not correct anymore. You've said what you've said. Now, I want to speak about explaining why reparative justice is a necessary feature of the discourse on slavery. I want to talk about identifying the elements of focus when we are discussing reparations. Reparations is not just about money. There are many other ways of making reparations. Yes.
Do you think Caribbean nations should also pay reparations for the Chinese indentured labor that they asked for?
Indentured labor is a completely different argument, my dear. We will deal with that on another occasion. Why is reparations necessary? The definitions that you have heard already is what we're talking about. What is it? We are to adhere to a moral imbalance. We are to try and correct that moral imbalance. The first undeniable factor is that the colonies where slavery was exercised profited not. The profit went to the plantation owners, many of whom presided over their fortunes from Britain and continued to amass significant sums of money even after the abolition of the slave trade. We have heard two names here of well-known Britons whose family made their wealth out of slavery. I watched the Olympics opening ceremony and that whole period that went into the development of the industrial era in Britain. I want you to know that that was fuel from slavery. That was fuel from the sugar that was produced in our countries. You walk around Britain today and you see the buildings, you see the marble. I went to Scotland and I was taken around and shown buildings that said, this was bought from the proceeds of a slave that was owned. And when slavery was abolished and payments made to the slave owners, they built that house. All over the UK is the tangible evidence of how the society benefited from the proceeds of slavery. No? We have been discussing this matter, and the reparations is not limited to the payment of money. There is, what about the cultural institutions? What about the public health crisis that exists in some of our countries? What about illiteracy eradication? What about the psychological rehabilitation that is required? What about technology transfer? What about debt cancellation? In our countries, in the Caribbean, 50% of all of our budget goes towards the payment of debt. And why was that debt incurred? To put in place all of the infrastructure and the requirements to allow our countries to come into we're in the 21st century now, aren't we? Into the 21st century. Indeed, if you have ever watched a Channel 4 documentary, which was called The Empire Pays Back, yes, it spoke to the issue of a financial settlement. And it suggested that there was a minimum of $7.5 trillion that would be necessary as monetary compensation. But as I say, that is only one possible dimension of the argument. And it is not the sole basis on which reparations is to be accepted or rejected. It is for this reason that CARICOM has included the 10-point plan, some of them which I've told you about already. Many Caribbean countries really need help, not help as aid, but not a handout, but assistance to address the social infrastructural problems that exist in education and health, for example. I'm sorry? It doesn't always require money. It does not always require. We're not talking, earlier on we heard, who do we pay the money to? I'm not asking for you to pay the money to a government. I'm asking you to provide us with technical assistance, to provide us with the assistance that we need to help our education process. We don't need you to pay us money, although that would be good, because you have got our money. We need a public education awareness program. Too many people in this country here in the UK have no idea on what it is that their forefathers did to put Britain where it is today. No? So, one of the things that is required is an apology. A proper apology. An apology for what was a systematic and sustained pattern of enslavement that was preserved and fiercely protected for centuries. That must be part of the exercise going forward. It must be coupled with a willingness to engage former colonies on the matter and have a frank but open discussion about the issue and what is at stake. We in the Caribbean stand ready to lend its support in this endeavor. And we have already indicated our intention to convene a conference with European counterparts on the issue of reparations. The British Empire owned its existence and much of its ultimate wealth to the British Caribbean islands. There is a need for prompt and comparable British soul searching so that we can begin to properly address this dark period of our respective histories. I thank you.
Ikemba, a youth program on reparations. You were looking at a clip from Alun Asamba, who is the former Jamaican High Commissioner to the UK, and she was talking about the Caribbean's claim for reparations. Before we go, let's say thank you to Jamal Thornton, who returned. He's from West and from North Wrong Belt, who returned a lost phone to one of our brothers. So that was Alun Asamba, for former Jamaican High Commissioner to the UK, talking about Britain's claim. This evening, we spoke about CARICOM's involvement in reparations, youth involvement in reparations, a little bit about CARICOM's claim for reparations. Again, you're watching Ikemba. Thank you very much, and hope we see you next time.
Kiss you. Whoa. My African hips get down to you.
Kenyan legs will run to you. Now come on, umekuja to break down. Umekuja to get down. Umekuja to take chance. Hakuna matata.